All right, let's see if we can go take the 260 out for a spin and not blow it up this time. What I've been doing is 1 day a week in the shop, I just do for me. I don't film, I don't do anything, and I know sometimes that's disappointing for you because you don't get to come along for the ride. But it's beneficial for me. Sometimes it takes a lot of thought and effort into where I'm gonna set the camera, and I know it may not seem that way every single video or whatever, but I kind of got to think things out before I just hit record. That way it ends up being a decent video. And then sometimes I just want to work on the 260 and not have to mess with any of that. So that's what I do. I kind of started doing that a few months ago. And it's been beneficial for me to come out here 4, 5, or 6 days a week and work on the 280 for all the body work. And then one of those days a week, I'll spend working on one thing for the 260Z. Last week, I went out for my normal spin, which is normally about 50 miles. I do a 50-mile circle just to keep everything going on it, because if it does sit for any length of time, then it starts deteriorating. So I want to make sure that that doesn't happen. I've got it running halfway decent now, and I want to try to keep it running at least that good or better, but it's a Datsun, so, and this has literally nothing Datsun in it. I need to do a proper introduction video to this project and kind of highlight some of the things that are different, or just exactly what this car is in general. I started out working on a few little things, and it had gotten to the point where I felt like it could be driven a little bit further. So normally 50 miles goes by pretty quick, well, 30-minute ride. Come back to the house, checked everything out, and everything looked good. So I was like, you know what, I'll go for another 50-mile little circle. It was 100 miles in one day. It was the most amount of miles I've ever put on this car in a single day. And then I looked at the odometer and realized I'm only like 50 miles away from hitting 1,000 miles on the car since it's been off the rotisserie and I originally put it back together. The second engine that I put in it, from the first restoration off the rotisserie back on its own wheels and everything else way back in the day. Like I said, I'll do a proper introduction, that way you guys will be caught up to speed with that maybe in a future video, but I was only about 50 miles away from hitting a 1,000-mile mark, and that's a big milestone, so I kind of went for it. I took it further than I should have, and I planned a little 100-mile circle instead of a 50-mile circle, which only takes me about 20 miles down from the house, and then coming on back, right? So I went about 50 miles down the road and then started looping back around in typical fashion. The furthest distance that you get away from where you're supposed to be is when things go wrong, and that's when things went wrong. I noticed a slight little burning smell. I just put new rubber on it, so I thought maybe a tire was rubbing, and that was kind of upsetting. I want to say just over $300. I got 4 brand new tires, mounted and balanced. So that was a lot of fun, but I thought I was cutting one of those down because I smelled a little bit of rubber. Turns out it wasn't tire rub. It was actually the alternator belt had popped off. And on this one, it's just a single groove crank pulley with a water pump and an alternator, and that's it. That's all I have on here. There's no AC or anything like that. There's no power steering. So I don't know why that belt came off, but it did. It either broke or it popped off. The belts seem to be running fairly true, and everything appears to be relatively in line. So I don't know why it jumped off. It was tight until it went missing, and then it wasn't there anymore. Well, what happens when a belt comes off is it starts to overheat because the water pump isn't turning anymore. I realized kind of after about 30 to 40 seconds of something just not feeling right, that I only had 12 volts, and I knew immediately that the alternator wasn't charging. So I knew there was an issue with the belt. I pulled over, and lo and behold, the belt was gone. It was nowhere to be found. So I whipped it around. Luckily, my girlfriend's dad lives right down the road, so I drove 3 minutes up the road with no water pump spinning, which is interesting. I don't recommend doing that ever. I then got over there and then realized that obviously this can't make it to a parts store, so I needed to borrow one of their cars to go to the parts store. And then I realized I didn't bring my wallet. So if you're trying to make good impressions on your girlfriend's family, that's probably not a good way to do it. Show up in a broke down car that looks like this, ask for a car and money to go buy parts for your broken car. So, long story short, I went and did that, came back, and put a new bolt on it. On the way home, I had a little bit of headlight issue. It flickered, found a loose ground in there. So I've already switched these headlights to relays, which if you own a Datsun and you don't have them on relays, highly recommend you putting your headlights on relays. The way that these things were originally engineered from the factory was to send full voltage all the way through the headlight stock, all the way from the battery or fuse block, whatever you got, and then back to the actual headlight. So it's very thick gauge wire and it runs full length. That's not what you want for full power getting to the actual bulb. And these things are notorious for corrosion, not only in the bodies and chassis itself, but also in the electrical components. So I rewired this car a long time ago, so I knew I didn't have any, well, at the time, corrosion in the electrical wiring itself. Now I kind of do because rats and mice chewed it, but the actual power from the headlight stock wasn't getting to the relay. And I thought that was a headlight stock issue, but because those are notorious for going bad as well. So welcome to owning a Datsun. Everything kind of doesn't work. But it actually wasn't. It was just a loose ground. So I came back the next day, tightened all that up, and I actually took the camera with me and filmed a little bit of this footage. But after that overheating incident, and I was running out of daylight, knowing that my headlights were intermittent, I didn't want to be stuck out after night. And then obviously this doesn't really record good at night. So I just kind of put the camera away for the day because I nearly blew up my under 1,000 mile engine and nearly got stranded at night down the road with no headlights. So I wanted to get all that taken care of and then get back to the house. So we're a week later and I've got pretty much everything back fixed. I actually drilled out the intake and put a BMW temperature sensor on there, and that controls my Volvo 2-speed fan relay that powers my Taurus 2-speed fan. So a lot of different components from a lot of different manufacturers, but it works. I checked out the low speed and the high speed, and it's all automatic now. So I used to have this on a switch, and I used to only have it wired to high. So that way, if I needed the electric fan to do any cooling, that I could just click the switch and it would come on. The only problem with that is it's such a large amperage draw on startup that it bogs the motor down. And if the motor's not completely 100% warmed up, then sometimes the motor will stall out. So I wanted to get that fixed, and this kicking on low speed still draws a lot of amps, but it's not as much as high speed initial startup. So when it runs on low speed, if it does need the high speed, it's already spinning, it's already running, so kicking it to high speed from the low speed doesn't draw near as many amps and doesn't bog the motor down or cause it to stall out or anything like that. The other advantage is I don't have to monitor anything anymore. It's all automated. So this should work fairly well, but it's a Datsun. So most things don't work very well. But we're going to go give it a little quick rundown and see if we can't enjoy 50 miles. I'm going to go back to my original circuit because the last time that I went further, bad things happened. So I'm going to go back to my 50-mile recheck radius, and we're going to see if we can't put some miles on the old 260 today. So hope you enjoy.